The Kansas River was the first river I ever really thought about floating, because I'd lived close to the Kansas River my whole life because I'm a lifelong Kansan. But when I was growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, not a lot of people floated the river. In fact, I remember my grandma just had the memory of like the 1951 flood in her mind, and she always said, stay away from that river. And when I came to college in Lawrence, you know, I was even closer to the river, and I thought, why don't we go float the river? But I never did it. And so one winter, when I was in college, I decided that I would walk on the river. And so I walked on the river when it was frozen from Eudora to Lawrence, and it is not recommended. And so, you know, like you'd be on the middle of the river and you hear these gunshot sounds, and it was the ice cracking. And you know, there was no real danger involved probably, but I managed to walk 12 miles on the frozen river, and it was an incredible experience. And so that was my first time ever on the river, was walking it from Eudora to Lawrence. I've been more involved in going on the guide floats in the last 10 years or so with them, and I was a little bit involved with the group when Laura was the river keeper, but then afterwards when Don joined, I've become more involved. But Laura and Don, when I was writing my book, The Last Wild Places of Kansas, Laura Caldwell and Mai Caldwell were people that I talked to a lot, who, you know, talked to me about the Kansas River, and that's how I kind of learned from them the mission of Friends of the Kaw and how they were combining, you know, recreation with river advocacy, which I thought was a great combination. And so I've always been in it to float on the river and be on the river, and most of my canoeing in my life has been by myself. And so Friends of the Kaw are the first group that I've ever kind of started paddling with other people on, rather than just being a lone wolf out there by myself. I am sort of an environmental journalist, but Friends of the Kaw, the river guides are kindred spirits with me. And when I was working on my book, one of the things I did was, you know, do basically a through float of the river, although when I did it, it was at flood stage, and so I didn't make the lower part of the river. And the guys at Friends of the Kaw were some of the first people I'd met who also were trying to float the entire river like in one go. And so yeah, you know, what's great about Friends of the Kaw is for a river our size, we have such a dedicated group of people that are both advocates of the river, but also environmental stewards of it. And they're thinking of creative ways, you know, at a slow, measured pace to get other people interested in the river, but in more of an organic way, you know, and they're not trying to, you know, there's not a lot of environmental moralism going on. It's you know, the thing with Friends of the Kaw is to come out and have fun on the river, drink beer if you want to, enjoy the sandbars, and then learn about also why it's important to, you know, to advocate for the rivers. When I was working on the book, my book, I was interested in the fact that, you know, Kansas is a unique state in that only 2% of Kansas is publicly owned. So we only have, you know, 2% of the state that if you're just a member of the general public and you don't own land you can go out into. And on top of that, we have the most draconian river access laws of any state in America. Besides the Kansas, the Missouri, and the Arkansas rivers, canoeing or paddling is essentially illegal. And so, you know, if you want to go float the entire Meridazine River, you really can't do that. But you can float the Kansas River, and the Kansas River has some unique things about it that distinguishes it from other prairie rivers, other than the fact it is the longest prairie river in the country. The Smoky Hill River, which is its maiden name, as the beginning of the river, it's the longest prairie river in America that doesn't start on a mountain. And it's got some of the best backcountry camping in the entire American West on the sandbars. It's a very underutilized, little-known resource outside of our local area. And I'm not necessarily advocating that we, you know, put a call out to to make it a big recreational river, but it's got a lot of potential in that way. And you know, that's something that Friends of the Kaw is definitely doing, is getting the word out that we've got river access points at all the major cities. There's a brewery in each of those cities. There's a fun reason to go from city to city. And I have people that email me and reach out to me, and more every year, of people that are coming from out of the state to try to mount through floats, and they've got maybe a bucket list of rivers, and more you see serious canoers that put the Kansas River on their list. So probably my favorite memory on the river is I had forgotten how special the section from Bellevue to Topeka is. And it's a section of the river that has less access than other sections of the river. It's none of the Kansas River is a wild river in the sense of a wild, pristine environment. But if you measure access by how many publicly accessible boat ramps there are none between Bellevue and Topeka. There are bridge access points that people don't normally take on, and it is trespassing to access the river by those bridge takeout points. So it provides a section of the river that's relatively unvisited. And I hadn't been on that section of the river in many, many years. And a few years ago, I went on a multi-day float with them on that section. Right when the cottonwoods were turning, their fall colors, they kind of looked like stands of aspen along the river. And we floated by a section where I always see a golden eagle. I think that golden eagle has probably lived in that area for 20 years, or maybe the golden eagle and its family tree. And when I floated with the guides those nights, they all had really good Sandbar camping equipment and camping. They knew how to camp. And we had jack-o'-lanterns because it was close to Halloween, from pumpkins that we'd found while floating along. And it was one of my funnest camping experiences here in Kansas in a long time. These guys, the guides at Friends of the Caw, they know how to camp in Kansas. So Christina, my wife, had a radio show on KKFI, and she had, I can't remember the person's name, but she's one of the founders of Dirty Girls Adventures. And she was telling us a story. This isn't something I experienced, but telling us a story about how they were floating on the Caw. And a turkey swam up to their boat and jumped into her lap on her kayak and tagged along for the next 3 miles. And so there are lots of stories like that on the Caw, right? So unusual things you see on the river that you don't see every day in Kansas. Again, I think that rivers are places that, there are a lot of people that walk on trails like here at Caw State Park, but they don't necessarily go on river trails, right? And so you see things that maybe people that have lived near the rivers all their lives, these are rarely seen sights for lifelong residents. And so lots of times you'll see, we have a lot of deer. Maybe people don't know that deer swim across the river in groups sometimes. And have you ever seen a squirrel swim across the river? It's a bizarre thing. I've seen it several times on the Kansas River. For the river itself, like many prairie rivers, I see that there's a growing interest in navigating prairie rivers, and it's mainly a demographic, driven by the demographics of the American Midwest. You have people moving into the Midwest that bring their interest in outdoor adventures in terms of running rivers, hiking in the mountains, those kinds of things, moving to the Midwest. And they're transferring that interest to the prairie rivers, which are undiscovered resources. And the Kansas River could be a keystone river in that group of rivers. Like I said before, it has a good stop every 12 miles with a city where you can refuel and go out to dinner, right? It's got incredible camping opportunities along the sandbars. There's a small nucleus, but it's growing, of cities doing developments along the rivers, although I don't know how far that will go. But what I hope is that small amount of development, then coupled with, environmental restoration along the rivers itself, prairie restoration, wetlands restoration, which, this is a navigable river technically, but there's no barge traffic on the Kansas River. That's not going to be, they're not going to channelize the river for that reason. We only have 3 real dams along the river. We have impediments in Topeka, in Lawrence, where we have the most, serious dam at the Barasock, and then at I-435. All of those things bode well for a recreational river that is used by, the fishermen that have used the river for decades, but also kayakers and canoeists, and then people interested in environmental aspects of the river. So I hope that continues, that people get out and experience the river, and I hope that younger people discover the river too. And so that's like a main goal for me, is that at least something I'd like to see is, new generations of people, learn about the river. I hope that they keep the river keeper position going, and that they continue this really unique blend of recreation and environmental advocacy. And they continue to bring people onto the board that are, experts in different areas that are not necessarily directly, river recreation or directly related to rivers, but can bring experiences from other wildlands management and other sciences, and even, tourism to the group.